Good afternoon. Welcome to Robert Sungenis Live. This time for June the 3rd, I believe. As you know, this program is set aside for you to ask your questions, give your comments on any topic whatsoever. And in my role as host of this program, I will endeavor to answer your questions to the best of my ability, using our Catholic faith, scripture, tradition, the fathers, the medievals, the popes, the councils, the saints, the doctors, encyclopedias, the catechisms, and just about anything I can find to help you walk away satisfied that your question has indeed been answered. We come to you every Wednesday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And usually at the top of the program, we have some email questions to cover first. And we will also take your questions on our chat board. And we just have a couple rules for that, which is to put the word question in capital letters before your question so that I know it's a question when I scroll down. And one other rule, a Christian rule, just be kind and benevolent to each other, in case you get into some heated discussions about theology, which invariably happens whenever theology comes up. All right, so what we're going to do is get to the email questions first. I only have 2 today, and I probably have missed some. So if I have missed your email question, and because I know some of you, write in 2 or 3 times, if I haven't answered your question, you let me know about it. So I try to be as diligent as I can about those, and sometimes I still miss it. Not on purpose, just want to let you know that. So we'll get to the email questions, and let's see if there's anything else we need to cover. Oh, yeah, last week, for some reason, the chat board was not working. Now, I know that you were sending in questions, but for some reason, I don't know, sometimes I get into this little outfit here that I signed up for a couple of months ago, and they give me different, screens every time I get into it. I have a different screen. So this one, I made sure I had the correct one 10 minutes before I got into the program. So if there was anything wrong, I would hopefully be able to contact them. At any rate, here I am. And I know the chat room is working because I see your questions. And so we'll get to those relatively soon. Just hang on there. See if there's anything else I need to cover. Oh, I don't know if this is a fluke or just somebody playing games or whatever, but I got an invitation on Facebook from the Pope today, and it put him under the name Robert Prevost, Cardinal Robert Prevost, seeking my friendship on Facebook. Now, as I said, I don't know whether that's a spoof or what. Somebody could just as easily put the Pope's picture up there, or Robert Prevost when he was a cardinal, and pretended to befriend me. By the way, if you've tried to befriend me on Facebook, I really pay attention to those. So I hate to say it, but it's not that I want to be unfriendly. That's for sure. It's just that don't want to hurt your feelings at all. Don't mean to be disrespectful. I just don't, I'm of that older generation, who didn't have Facebook. We're lucky we had TV, color TV. So, still taking me a while to get used to all that. social media stuff. But I know it's the wave of the future. It's the wave of the present. I better get involved with it. I usually have other people do that for me. But at any rate, I just wanted to let you know that I got befriended by the Pope, and I accepted. And then the next day, it turned around and said, Cardinal Robert Prevost has accepted your friendship. So I may have a direct line to the Pope. Who knows? We'll see. So that's something new. Just thought I'd pass that by you. All right, so let me get to these email questions here. Well, sometimes they write in, type it out in small print, so I have to wear these glasses. Hello, Dr. S. When the first altars were being made, God stipulated that they were not to be hewn with tools of iron. When Solomon made the temple, he had stone cut at the quarry and brought down to be the foundation stones of the temple, though overlaid with wood and covered in gold. Solomon, by inference, seemed to think the cacophony of noise of cutting the stone would be offensive in a holy spot. Thus, the work was done at the quarry site. Do you think he was unaware of the older admonition regarding constructing a holy place of worship and sacrifice? That Jesus is identified as the cornerstone upon which all else is built seems to personify the spiritual aspect of the true temple, which was not recognized by the Jewish leaders. Is this a parallel to the original temple, bypassing a previous directive? I also find parallels intriguing on the church's admonitions against the Freemasons, which originally was the stonemasons, who would have labored making the cathedrals, and that some of the fuel for the Reformation was the money being raised by indulgences for the construction of St. Peter's. Any comments on this? I appreciate. Okay, well, I think you're making a mistake here. There was no older admonition not to build a place of worship, the temple. I know God said to Solomon, I inhabit the whole universe. Why are you going to make a temple for me? But later on, God told Solomon to make a temple and actually set up all the things. The Sidonians, and they were experts in making wood things. And who was he? King Hiram. He made friends with him again, and he supplied a lot of timber for the temple. So, God was behind the building of the temple, even though he had told Solomon that, why do you want to build me a temple? Because I inhabit the whole universe. He did allow it. Okay, so I don't think you can make that statement here that there was an older admonition not to make a place of worship. Okay. So I think that's where you're making your mistake. And if that is so, then it undercuts your whole thesis that there's some kind of taboo against making cathedrals, No, we don't find that at all in the Old or New Testament. What we do find, of course, is people abusing, the temple or cathedrals for that matter. And you mentioned indulgences. Well, that was one way. People saw the great cathedrals and They were intimidated by the church. How can we build such great things? God must be here. And then they sold them indulgences. Okay, so it's easy to abuse the physical ornaments or buildings and use them for purposes that they weren't intended for. Like Jesus cast out the money changers from the temple. The temple was not made for business. It was made for prayer. And so, I think that's more along the lines of what you're seeking, abuse of the temple, not so much that it couldn't be used. Okay, got that done. All right. Do you have ideas on JP2, John Paul II's philosophy of personalism? I sometimes hear it is anthropocentric. And on his theology of the body, what is it in essence? Thank you. Mr. Chan. Mr. Chan, you do have some provocative questions, that is for sure. You are a thinker. All right, so I don't know if I've ever done this on this program. Did we ever get into the theology of the body? Well, if not, we're going to now. So buckle up. I would say here's the thing. The theology of the body, is not an official church teaching. It's the musings, philosophical kind of musings of John Paul II that he delivered between 1979 and 1984, right when he became Pope, on the Wednesday morning addresses. So the theology of the body became the accumulation of all those Wednesday addresses, and there's a lot of them. I mean, if you consider there's 52 Wednesdays every year, times at least 5 years, okay, that's 250 plus addresses on the theology of the body, with only a short interim at some point. I forget when that was. I think it was 1983. He was talking about something else. But where did this all come from? Well, John Paul II was sort of a personal kind of guy, He had a great smile. He was not dour at all, as some popes. He was not majestical, like sometimes if you think of Pius XII riding on the papal throne, being carried by men holding rods. And you don't see that with the Pope anymore, okay? And a lot of that, John the 23rd had a little bit of that, possibly Paul VI. And then he gave away the papal crown to the UN. So that ended that image of the Pope. The tiara I'm talking about. And John Paul II, I don't think he ever wore the tiara. Of course, it was given away, or any semblance of it. And I don't think he was ever carried on a throne, the papal throne that they used to carry the popes around with. So he more or less rejected that image of the Pope as the austere, theological technician kind of person, and more of a, personal touch. And that was just his personality. Okay. You can't separate his personalism from his own personality. Like I said, he had a great smile. He shook everybody's hand. He went around the world. the most traveled pope in the world, greeting everybody, accepting everybody, um, rarely critical of those he met, trying to bring the world together in peace and harmony. I'm not saying everything was right about what he did. I'm just saying this was his modus operandi. So he's very personal, and that's where you get personalism from. Now he's reacting also, and John Paul II did this a lot. He reacted against the Catholicism prior to him. Okay, that's why he has so many saints. John Paul II canonized more saints than all of the popes combined prior to him. Okay, so it tells you the individuality of each pope, like what Pope Leo the 14th is going to be. We have no idea, but it'll come out, and his own understanding of theology, of himself, of the church is going to come out, just like it did with Francis. Each is different. We've got to be prepared for that. So John Paul is definitely more personal, jovial, congenial. There's 1,000 words you could attach to it, but he was also critical of the church before him, canonized all these saints, accepted many more people than the Catholic Church before him into the fold, so to speak, almost to the point where people began to question whether John Paul II was a universalist. Somebody who thought that everybody was going to be saved, because there are hints in, or possible suggestions in his writings that he was tending toward that or was there. Universalism. So, you can take your idea about being personal too far. You want to include everybody, but sometimes you can go overboard. And that's the danger with any philosophical movement. Any philosophical movement can go overboard because it thinks it has the answer to life, so to speak. But life's a lot more complicated than that. Nobody has the perfect formula, the perfect equation, like scientists try to find. The what do they call that? The final equation, or whatever they want to call it. I forget the exact name. They're always looking for the ultimate statement to be made about life. But there ain't no ultimate statement. Okay? Life's too complicated. The best we can do is try to hold things together as best we can so nothing leaks out that it should be in, and nothing comes in that shouldn't be there. It's about the best we can do in this life. And Holy Spirit, of course, helps us do that. Which is why we have a Catholic Church, you see. Because you can have a lot of individuals in the Catholic Church, like John Paul II was an individual with an individual theology, so to speak. How do we hold those all together? Well, Catholicism has a lot of faces. Okay? And all those faces have their good points and bad points. And by that, we can be inclusive on the one hand and exclusive on the other. I mean, that's a complicated thing. So at any rate, he was reacting against a little bit of Aquinas, because Aquinas's basic philosophy or metaphysics was based on being. That might not mean much to you, but these scholastic guys at that time were in debates about, what's more important, being or doing, things like that. Like, because you're trying to think about God existing by himself. What's more important? God doing something or just being? And they would debate these things. And, that can get pretty esoteric. But the big winner with Aquinas was being. It's more important than doing. And then, you can even the philosophers of our day, or, maybe 100 years ago, like, who will be Jean-Paul Sartre, and Albert Camus. One would say being is doing, and the other would say doing is being. Two existential philosophers around the turn of the century. And then you get the other philosopher named Frank Sinatra, who said, doobie doobie doo. So that's where it sometimes ends up, because nobody knows the real answer, you see. So Thomas was into ontology, which is being, and who's going to understand all that? So it doesn't filter down to the people as you would like it to. So it becomes sort of an esoteric theology, and it has a certain austere dimension to it as well. You're going to talk about these highfalutin philosophical concepts like ontology. You're going to draw a certain crowd, and it ain't going to be the populace, that's for sure. It just goes right over their head. And is that Jesus? Is that what the Bible's talking about with God and the people and all those things? Come on, man. Is that what Jesus is trying to teach? Ontology? No, we know that Jesus is much more personal, right? Much more in your face kind of theology. It's just very direct. We're not talking about philosophical concepts here. Like, did he ever have philosophical discussions with the Pharisees? No, there's not one in Scripture. Okay. What was he concerned about? He was concerned about their personal lives, and that they were damned hypocrites is what they were, putting on a pretense of being some way when they were the exact opposite, and thought they could get away with it with everybody except when Jesus came along and point the finger at them. Because there's one thing that God's looking for. I don't care if you're an ontologist or a phenomenologist like John Paul II. He's looking for righteousness, period. And if you can be righteous, you're going to be the greatest philosopher that ever lived. Okay? Because your philosophy works. It keeps you from sin. It keeps you righteous. That's what God wants, because God's holy, holy, holy. Okay? But when you're into philosophy, you're going to get into these kinds of things. You're going to debate about what's better, ontology or phenomenology. Now, what's phenomenology? This is the basis for the whole personalism aspect of John Paul II, or the theology of the body, for that matter, is phenomenology, which is what? Phenomenology is another philosophical outlook of existence, which doesn't concentrate on ontology, although it doesn't, totally ignore it. It's not its emphasis, because it only takes you so far. Phenomenology is more like experience. Like, I want to experience the phenomenon, whatever it is out there. I want to experience it firsthand. You see, I don't want to read about it. Somebody is writing it in a book. I want to experience it firsthand so I know what it's like. And so the phenomenologist is seeking for experience, seeking to fulfill that need to know what it's like, what it feels like. I mean, because somebody could tell you what it's like to go on a roller coaster, but it's nothing like feeling it yourself. As a matter of fact, you could read about it from somebody and he could give you all the deepest descriptions he can think of. Until you actually go up and down on that roller coaster, you're not going to know what it's like, you see. And that's what phenomenology is seeking, this philosophy. I want to know it personally, you see. Whereas Thomas could tell you, here's what it's like, and translate that to theology, Here's what God is like in his being. And he'll give you all the stipulations about what being means and how, that's God. Oh, yeah. Well, there's no personalism in it, you see. And that's why John Paul II, in his theology of the body and his personalism, would hearken back to saints like St. John of the Cross. Was 1200s, St. John of the Cross. And he lived in a time where you had the mystics, Catholic mystics, who were on spiritual journeys that you and I probably have never experienced before. And this includes St. Teresa of Avila, and Meister Eckhart, and a bunch of other saints during that period who were into mysticism and spiritual experience. Like Teresa of Avila talks about her mystical experience with God, and then it dried up for 20 years. Was without a mystical experience, and she thought she was going to go crazy. Where is God? What happened? Blah, 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 all that stuff. So, reading their books, it was a very intense experience, whatever they were experiencing. If it was real or part of it was their imagination, we don't know. But they attributed it to God, and, take your guesses from there. But they were the first phenomenologists, you might want to say. And these were people who examined their life. You could say, in a sense, that they were the first psychoanalysts. Because you read their books and they're like going into every single little detail about their life and saying, where's the motive for this? Why did I do that? What was my motive? What was my reason? Trying to get down to the deepest part of their soul to figure out where this mistake came from, that they happened to sin or have a bad thought or whatever. And so they were psychoanalyzing themselves before Freud ever came along, So these people were deep. And you can imagine they became very personal. Okay? When they met each other, it was a deep experience. Who was it? St. Francis was the same way. And what was his relationship with, what was her name? The woman who helped him in many ways. Rita? Was it Rita? I forget. But he was the same way. He was definitely psychoanalyzing himself to the umpteenth degree and was very personal. And his father never understood him because his father was a businessman. He was the typical ontologist, so to speak. And so, and then you had the clash between the Franciscans and the Dominicans for that same reason. The Dominicans were these austere intellectuals who examined everything under a microscope. And the Franciscans just wanted love and brotherhood and, but it doesn't mean that the Franciscans were right. They had half a story, and that's good. And it doesn't mean the Dominicans were bad. They have every right to look at things under the microscope, theologically speaking. It's just that sometimes they go to one side and forget the other side. That's the issue. And that's what John Paul II thought in his, pushing of phenomenology, that, we've gone too far to the intellectual, ontological microscope side, and we need to be freer than that. We need to show the world that Christianity is not just looking under a microscope and getting all your boxes checked doctrinally. Yep, got that right. You see. So in that sense, he had a good movement. But like I said, with Sartre, Camus, Jaspers, Heidegger, these were all like the secular phenomenologists after Edmund Husserl. And where they wanted the freedom that John Paul was trying to push in Catholicism, they went too far, you see. And this is what happens with these movements. And it could happen, it basically did happen with the secular phenomenology. They went too far, and so Sartre starts saying, life is absurd. Because if this is all it is, I'm seeking my experience. How can I experience? And I'm standing on a street corner watching the cars go by, and this is what I'm supposed to experience? This is absurd, you say. And Jaspers, he was the same way. He used to talk about the final experience, that in order to authenticate yourself and show that you had experienced what you were supposed to experience as a phenomenologist, you had to have what they called the final experience. And some of them said that was suicide, death. That's your final experience. So you see how they can be deceived. The devil can deceive you into saying, yeah, you need more freedom. You need to live life. You need to experience it. Go out there and experience it. And then you end up, what do you do? What do you see? You see all the sin in the world. That's the problem. But you're seeking for an experience, baby. So let's experience, and here's the final experience. You can't deny this one. Suicide. And you can see this in some of the artist movements of the day, like Impressionism. Who's the most prominent? What's his name? Not Gauguin. Renoir. He's sort of like the doorway to these other guys. But Renoir, if you notice, all his paintings are like someone's taking a picture, but it's not like a photo. It's like what it's like you seeing a scene, seeing a picture, and then turning away from the picture and trying to remember what it looks like. And what you see in your mind is not the photograph. You see impressions. You see the color impressions, you see the people impressions, you see the geometry impressions that make an impression on your mind in the 2 or 3 seconds that you look at the picture. That's why it's called Impressionism. And what's he trying to tell us philosophically? What he's trying to tell us is that this is how you feel. This is part of phenomenology, is how you feel. Because if you want to experience something for yourself, like on the roller coaster, you want to see how it feels. You see. So Impressionism is, what feeling are you left with? Because the feelings are going to bring the memory of the picture up to you and tell you what was important to you. Well, I saw the woman over there and she was dressed in a white dress, or I saw the guy over there, he was dressed in a suit. And that's what I remember. And what color was the suit? Well, it looked black. It may not have been black, but and are you sure the color was white? Yeah, I think it was white. That's the impression I got. You see, so it's how you feel, and a lot of this was coming out in the art, the music, everywhere at that time. And this is the time that phenomenology had developed as a philosophy. A few years before that, with Edmund Husserl, to get away from the failure with Kant and Hegel and all these other guys, you got this other movement coming along. Say, don't worry, we got this phenomenology. Now you can base your philosophy on feelings and expressions and experiences and all that kind of stuff. And what they find out, however, is, like, if you take a painting like Picasso, where it's called The Woman, but you can't tell the difference between a woman and the chair that she's supposed to be sitting in, because they're both amalgamated. And, so what's Picasso telling us about his feeling? If this is what we're supposed to be going after now, the feeling, the experience, what's he feeling? Well, he feels like crap. That's what he feels like. Okay, because if you have a woman who looks like a chair, or a chair that looks like a woman, you're not feeling very well. And that's how Picasso used to. He was a Spaniard who used to paint how he felt. And that's why he had the blue period, the red period, this period, that period, because his feelings would change all the time. And some of his worst paintings, when he really felt bad, you could tell. Okay, so in other words, this feeling, this philosophy is not going to end up in some nirvana. Okay, you're going to have the same problems everybody else does. You deal with the fact that you have this body that's cursed and ain't going to feel well every day. Okay, you're going to have sicknesses, diseases, toothaches, can't sleep that night, every single day. Okay, and somebody's going to treat you wrong, and you're not going to like it, and you're not going to feel very well, or your wife did this to you, your husband did that to you, your kids did this to you, you're not going to feel very well, and you got to cope with all this. So you might feel like crap. Okay, and that's just the nature of life. And you can thank Adam and Eve for that. And it ain't going to get any better. And men keep trying these philosophies. Well, let's try this philosophy. Kant, and then David Hume, and then, Hegel, and then this Kierkegaard. And so, each try and guess what? They all end up in the same place. And if you're not careful, you might end up, as Jaspers did, thinking that suicide is your final experience and it's going to solve all your problems. Well, yeah, it'll take you out of the world. You won't have the curse of sin to deal with anymore. But we all know the next question, of course, don't we? So that's basically what John Paul II is hankering for in this personalism. Now, you see a lot of these same paradigms in life between, the legal side and the personal side. And we have that in one of the greatest institutions that we know of, which is marriage. Okay? Marriage has a legal side. I mean, you even have to get a license to get married. Okay? They have to make sure your blood type's okay and that you weren't married before, and so you're legal fodder for marriage now. Okay? And then after you get married, you have a legal side that has to be maintained. Okay? You can't cheat on your spouse. I mean, you can't go create another family because that's bigamy or polygamy, you see? So you have to obey the legal laws before you're married and when you're married. And even if you want to dissolve your marriage, there are legal laws you have to go through. And if you don't go through them, then you're not recognized as being divorced. Okay? So there's a legal side to marriage and there's the personal side. And we all know what that is. That's, I love you, honey. I love you too. And, did I love my wife when I married her on the altar, made it legal? No, I married her. I married her and I loved her. I loved her long before I got married to her. Okay. That's one of the reasons why I pursued the legal end, which is marriage. Because I could have loved her without asking her to marry me. And never made it legal, never made it recognized officially in the world. I could have always loved her and held my love secret. Okay? So, with marriage, as I said, it has to be legal and personal. Same with religion. We got the 10 Commandments. That's legal. And then we have all the punishments stipulated for not obeying the 10 Commandments. It's all legal. Okay? But is that what God wanted from the people? Oh, sure, God. Yeah. Let's do this. Let's, I don't really like you, but since you're going to threaten me with hell, if I don't obey these commandments, I'll be first in line to obey them. That's totally selfish. That's exactly what God doesn't want. He made you in his image to reciprocate what he is, personal, and to love him. That's why he says, love the Lord your God. Okay? Not just obey the commandments. So, and then the paradigms between justice on the one hand, which is more legal, and mercy on the other, which is more personal. You've got even in things like, traditionalism on the one hand that tries to stick to what we already did, and then modernism that's always trying to find a new and better way. Not that either of them is wrong, but they're going to clash until there's a meeting of the minds, so to speak, as to where we go. Okay? And that usually that's one thing about Hegel's philosophy that everybody likes. You have the thesis, you have the antithesis, and then you have the synthesis of the two. It does make a little sense. But anyway, so John Paul II's reaction to the stiffness of former Catholic theology has its, place. because you see what happens if you get too stiff, too rigid. Then you lose the flavor, the sense of why you're doing what you're doing. You see, not because God told you so much, it's because you love God, and love is personal. And that's what John Paul II was hankering for. You see, real, genuine love of God. And, it's easy to talk about. It's not so easy to instill in people. Because when you start talking about, special love of God, some people, they're just not there. You're only going to get a special or a certain amount of people that really understand that, as the mystics found out, back in the 1200s. There is a couple things about the theology of the body that I think need to be reworked. And one is like the thesis statement of the theology of the body, which is something like the body alone is capable of making visible the invisible, the spiritual and the divine. Now, I think that was made up by Christopher West. But that is such an absolute statement that I like, whoa. The body alone is capable of making visible the invisible? I would say, the body is important in making visible the invisible, but not the body alone. You see, because now you're showing that tendency to try to make your philosophy like the ultimate philosophy. The theology of the body is the ultimate philosophy. No. Okay. It's a helps us to understand aspects that we have maybe misunderstood before or didn't consider before. Can't help but do that. But it's not, the only way. Okay? Because look, you have angels, they have no body, right? The Trinity didn't have any body before Jesus became man. And they were around a long time before us. Okay? So there wasn't even a necessity to make visible the invisible. All right? So that's one thing. You got the souls that are now in heaven that have been waiting for Jesus to come back. Millions, billions of them. Okay? They're just in their souls. Their bodies are in the grave. Okay? So they're not capable of understanding the invisible? I don't think so. You've got there's a whole class of people that John Paul II left out in the theology of the body, because theology of the body is dealing with mostly marriage, the sexual relationship of spouses between each other. So that invariably leaves out all the elderly, all the widows who, because they're elderly, have been made widows. You've got the people who choose not to marry. In the different groups in Catholicism, we have people who choose not to be married, to choose to be celibate. They didn't want to become priests. They just wanted to become members of their, apostolate, whatever it was, and they choose not to be married. And you've got, the diseased, the crippled, the retarded. There's all kinds of priests, nuns. They don't get married. So what are they going to do with the theology of the body? Okay. So, you got to be real careful if you're going to try to make the theology of the body some exclusive philosophy that, is going to give us all that we need to know about God, kind of a thing. You got to be real careful with that. So that's one thing I see. Now they do the theology of the body does say that the body can never be considered just matter or mass. That's because that's where the Greeks made their mistake. The body was bad. Well, no, the body's not bad. The body is good. You can make the body bad, but the body intrinsically is good. Okay, so we don't go with Greek philosophy, and that's where even Descartes was going with understanding the body. Somehow it was bad, and we needed to get rid of it, and we could live spiritual lives. Not necessarily. Okay, and dealing with Kant's philosophy, Kant saw the morality side of life and said that we have basically the responsibility to choose the morally right decision. Which is quite rich coming from Kant, since he said that in his critique of pure reason that Aquinas' proofs of God were no good because it was all in our head. And we really had no good reason to take the things that were in our head and put them out into reality and say, oh, they're real. Sort of projecting our thoughts into the visible world. And anyway, so Kant had a lot of contradictions, but he didn't have a good understanding of sex. Sex was just for pleasure, according to Kant. And so, that brings man down to the ape level. I just respond to my urge, and when I have my urge and exercise it, I'm going to have, pleasure, and then it's over. No. Human beings can't live that way. Otherwise, they'd be animals. Okay? So that had to be wrong. So the theology of the body does elevate the sexual relationship between spouses. Now, again, that's remembering that we leave everybody else out of the picture. Okay? All those groups that I mentioned. And then it elevates the sexual relationship to an expression of love. Now, some of you probably say, well, what else could it be? I mean, come on, we already know that. Well, maybe you did, but the rest of the world may not. So we have a whole secular world out there that's all confused about the sexual relationship. And you can tell that by the way they treat women, okay, by the fact that the untoward society is filled with whores, fornicators, you name it. TV and movies are filled with teenagers going after sex because they've reached the point of lust because of their hormones. And that's about the farthest that they take it, you see. And so you got all these segments of society that have perverted sex, and that needs to be corrected. And so the best way to do that is to show that sex is an expression of love, which goes against some traditionalist ideas that sex is for reproduction only. Okay? And John Paul II wanted to bring Catholicism out of that sort of primitive, yet not wrong, because sex is for reproduction, but it's not only for reproduction. That's the message of the theology of the body. It's for unification, the unitive, to cement it, to broaden it, to express it. Because sex without love, we all know instinctively is wrong. That's why sex gets exploited, because the love of it is taken out and you just have the sex left. And then it becomes, as Kant said, just sex for pleasure. So can't have that. So in that sense, the theology of the body did something good for the understanding of the sexual relationship. And you can't take that away from it. So now there's a couple other things. The tendency sometimes for those who have sided with the theology of the body and then went on to teach it on their own, and one comes excuse me, one comes to mind, the most prominent, which would be Christopher West. Now, I'm sure Christopher West has some good things to say, but some of the tendencies we see in people like him who take it upon themselves now to go teach the theology of the body, so that the sexual experience between spouses now becomes one of inventiveness, one of exploration, one of see who can do better than somebody else, one-upmanship. See who can express it the best, or becomes a competition now among the portrayers of this to see who can best get to the heart and sell more books. Now, I hate to say that, but that's all part of the game. Okay, you got to be aware of that. I mean, Christopher West at one point used a phallus to represent an Easter candle. Okay, now, come on. Other Christian TOBs talk about, husband and wife having anal sex if that's what their desire is, because this is just another expression of sex between spouses. You can get to those lengths, and that's wrong, of course. It's like the Supreme Court justice says, I can't define obscenity for you, but I know it when I see it. And this is one of those cases, you see. So you got to be careful of that. There's always going to be exploitation of every good idea that's ever come across the desk. So now the other thing that I fault John Paul II for, even though he did bring sex up from the primitive level that it was, when he talked about the spousal relationship, he didn't like the fact that the Bible put the woman as subordinate to the man. Didn't like that. And you'll find this a lot in modern scholars. If they don't like something in the Bible, some admonition, some, traditional practice, you'll just say, well, it either wasn't part of the Bible, or some redactor put that in there, or some, later Christian with some animosity toward, women, or, they'll make up some excuse, all kinds of excuses. But at the end of the day, look, it's either part of the Bible or it's not. And if it's part of the Bible, then you got to obey it. If it's not, then you better be able to prove it. And recognizing that you're going to cut across the grain, where all the traditional Catholicism has understood the Bible as completely inspired by God, including all the 5 contexts in the New Testament that talk about women being subordinate to the man. I mean, there's no topic that's actually covered more than that one topic, believe it or not. So it must be important. Okay? So you deny it, you neutralize it at your own risk. Okay. And I question how you can have a real genuine theology of the body wherein you have the woman who is equal to the man. I just question that. And so anyway, that's one thing that I find. And there's some people who have studied the theology of the body, and they ask the genuine question, which is this realistic? To elevate sex to this point and use it as the basis for not only the relationship between husband and wife, but man and God, because that gets pretty deep now. The body becomes the vehicle for how we relate to God. Wow. And even if that was the case, is it realistic? How do you do that? See, a lot of unanswered questions there. There was a point where John Paul II, in one of his lectures on this theology of the body, said that the sin of Adam and Eve was that they lusted after their nakedness. I'm pretty sure that's how he said it. That they saw themselves naked and that they lusted because of this nakedness. And then when they discovered that that was a sin, then they became ashamed. Okay. Now I've heard other priests say this, that the sin of the Garden of Eden was that they indulged in sex. I guess that's a sort of a natural tendency to think that, because they're probably so tempted themselves with sex. I mean, it's there every day. Let's admit it. Okay? Maybe not so much with women, but with men, it's there every day, and you got to fight it every day. Let's be honest with ourselves. And so I can see men, theologians, projecting that onto the Genesis story and saying, oh, that must have been the temptation. God told them not to have sex, and they had sex. And then they felt ashamed afterward. You don't get that in the text, but you have to read between the lines, you see, to get that. That's what a lot of them teach. And that's totally wrong. Okay. You cannot read between the lines in something as important as that. Okay. They were made naked because they were married. Okay. God married them. This is now bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife. That's the marriage ceremony right there. You see. So they were married so they could be naked in front of one another and not be ashamed. Because they were married, they were not ashamed. If they weren't married, yeah, they would be ashamed. Okay? I mean, and as far as not having sex, I mean, how can you get that out of the text? The first command that God gives them is what? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the face of the earth. Now, how do you want to do that without sex? Okay? As a matter of fact, if they didn't obey that command, that would be contraception. And that's a sin. So just like husband and wife in their own bedroom, let's say the Garden of Eden was like their big bedroom, because they didn't have any houses yet. They could sleep on the ground and be satisfied, or, make a pile of hay or something. I don't know what they did, but they didn't have any houses yet, So when it came time to go to bed, they made a cushion somehow and slept on it, and they were fine, but they were naked. And that's usually what husband and wife can indulge in their own bedroom. You see? And nobody's ashamed, are they? No, because they're husband and wife. They have a special relationship that allows this and promotes it. Okay? So, just a couple more things and we'll go to the chat room. But when do they become ashamed? Husband and wife. When can they no longer be naked in front of one another? When one or both of them sins. That's when that happens. Yeah. Let's say one of them engaged in some extracurricular activity with somebody else. What's the first impulse when they meet their real wife or husband? Cover themselves up. Yep. Because they're ashamed of their sin, even if they don't admit it. And they're ashamed of what they've done to their relationship with their spouse, so they cover themselves up. That's what husbands and wives do. The slightest sin, the slightest breach of the relationship will cause one or the other to cover their nakedness. Maybe temporarily, maybe for a long time, who knows, depending on the severity of the incident. But that's what they do, you see. So you can imagine what Adam and Eve felt when they sinned before God. Yeah, he's the only one that could peer into their marriage relationship and recognize their nakedness, you see. And so now they're ashamed before God of their nakedness. He's like the third party in the marriage relationship. So he's included, and they're ashamed in front of him. That's why they cover themselves, because of the sin, not because they indulged in sex. I just wanted to get that last one in there. Now, let's turn to your questions and see what you have to say here. What career paths are available if you pursue a degree in theology? You can teach, depending on what kind of degree you get. If you get a THD or a PhD or a licentiate's degree, you can teach in a university, a college. If you get a master's degree, STL, you might be able to teach in a college, depending on what the subject nature is. You can certainly teach in a high school. You could teach, ask the church to hire you to be a, CCD teacher or a adult Sunday school teacher or something like that. So, there's a lot of opportunities available for people who have a theology degree. Okay. Now, I'll tell you, be honest with you, most of your theology degrees from today's Catholic institutions are liberal. So you better love liberal theology. Okay, and I'm even talking about Notre Dame, Catholic University of America, Loyola. They're all liberal now. Okay. So, if you like the stuff that I teach, I'm conservative. I am not liberal in the slightest use of the term. Okay? So, but I'm telling you what's out there so you can be prepared. You want a theology degree, you're going to at least have to find out what the liberals are thinking and then write about it in your dissertation. And show no signs of disagreeing with it, because they will oust you. Okay? They will oust you. One way or another, you will not be part of that university. because they're not going to give a degree to someone who does not believe the same liberal garbage that they believe. Okay? So be prepared. There used to be 5 conservative seminaries, and as many Catholic universities or colleges, but they're mostly all liberal now, and there's just a handful left. So good luck. Okay, I wish I had better news for you. That's the state of theology in Catholicism right now. Let's hope that Pope Leo the 14th turns it around somehow. Do you think? All right, let's look at the next question. What conditions must be met for slavery to be morally acceptable? I think the big thing was slavery, because there was a form of slavery in the Old Testament, and God did not look upon it as, morally inept. But you had to treat your slave like the indentured servants were treated, wherein they were given rights to make money outside of their employment with the boss, rights to vote, rights to have legal representation, rights to have their children cared for, health-wise or schooling-wise. If all those things are satisfied, wherein they have everything that the normal citizenry has, and are protected by the owner, okay, then it's okay. What slavery ended up being, however, was a taking away of all those things, taking away all the rights, so that the slave was forever indebted to you. He couldn't escape out of the situation. He was bound to it by, literal chains. And he had no freedom at all. Okay, that's what's wrong with slavery. There's nothing wrong with putting yourself under the employment of a benefactor who will pay you for your services. We do that in corporate America all the time, don't we? Yeah. And we say you work 40 hours, and if you don't, you will not get paid, and we will not represent you, and we will not give you benefits, health benefits or whatever. We won't take care of your children and your wife by giving you a house to stay at or whatever. You have to obey their rules. So in a sense, you're like under their, legal thumb. But you do have the right to leave, you see. A slave did not have the right to leave that situation. It made him bound to that situation. That's what's wrong with it. Okay. Now, the owner might say, well, he can't leave because he owes me this money or he owes me this work. Okay, well, then you have to give him a contract that says, you do this much work, you do this, and then you can be free. So I'm giving you a way out, so to speak, and that will work. Okay. So, those are the things that have to be added to it. What are your thoughts about Pope Leo the 13th? Basically, he was a good pope. I have never come across any negative aspect of his papacy, Pope Leo the 13th. I hope you're not talking about Leo the 14th, the present pope. He was very conservative. He had a love for laborers, and he had a very acute distaste for those who exploited them and abused them. Rerum Novarum is probably one of the best encyclicals that was ever written by a pope. And it's apparently something that Pope Leo XIV likes also and is going to fight for, which is good. Somebody's got to fight for the poor. And no less than the Pope. So that's good. He was very conservative as far as this whole evolution debate. He stuck to his guns. And in one encyclical of his, Arcanum Divinae Sapiente, 1881, I think that was, wherein he taught that whatever evolution says, the fact is Eve came from the rib of Adam. Period. So, evolution is having after the next pope coming down the pike, Pius XII, evolution was going to have a hard time trying to get from ape to man because Pius XII would not allow Catholics to believe in polygenism. Now, polygenism is the idea wherein there were thousands or even millions of apes becoming man at the same time on Earth. And Catholic doctrine says, no, that's impossible. If there were any apes becoming man, let's just assume that for the sake of argument, there could only be one ape that became a man, and his name was Adam, and Adam fell into sin and plunged the whole human race into sin. So if you're going to believe in evolution, you have to show us that there was only one man or one ape that became one man. Can you do that? And the answer, of course, is no. Evolution needs polygenism to survive. Okay. So that was going to be true with Pius XII, and Leo XIII had already taken out the idea that Eve was a product of evolution, only on the female side. And then, of course, that's the problem that evolutionists have had from the beginning, is how do you get the female into the population? It's one thing to talk about, evolutionary development and all this stuff, but no, you'll notice they never talk about the sexes. Okay? Well, as it turns out, the Bible has the only answer to that. God made them male and female. Okay? That's the answer. There is no other answer. So, because how could a gender evolve? Okay, so that's what he was good for. And at this time, in the late 1800s, you had some real battles going on between the creationists and the evolutionists. Because Darwin had already written his book, Origin of Species, in 1859. Okay, right when Pius IX was the Pope. And then Leo came along next and was fighting these evolutionists hand over fist and made a pretty good impact. So, yeah, he was a good Pope. All right, let's see where we are here. Is there any evidence of you finding convincing for existence of black holes? No, probably not. Look, black holes, white holes, wormholes, they're all product of the mathematics of general relativity. Okay? And that's why they're looking for them. So, see, the mathematics of general relativity has no limits on gravity. It put a fudge factor in the original tensor equation, the lambda fudge factor, to try to slow down the expansion of the universe. Because, if not, then you'd have a runaway expansion. And Einstein wanted a steady universe. So he put his lambda factor in there to slow things down so he could get a steady universe. But see, Lemaitre came along and said, look, you talked about stretching the universe by expansion. Well, let's just reverse the process. And that gets us back to this singularity, or what Lemaitre called the cosmic egg. Because if you have this big expansive universe and you're going to reverse the process, that means it's all going to fall in on itself. Okay, and what happens then? Well, then you have a situation where you have a black hole. Because what happens in a black hole? Well, gravity sucks in everything, and it becomes so intense that nothing can escape, and it becomes a big hole. Okay, so that's the tendency of Einstein's gravitational equation. Is it's going to all come back into a little point, and that's going to turn into a black hole. Nobody wants that. Okay, as Stephen Hawking said, black holes are the curse of general relativity. Okay, because that's where the universe ends up, in a black hole. Is that what we want? No. So we don't go by the mathematics of general relativity. The only thing we use general relativity for is for appreciation of the geocentric universe. Because general relativity, by definition, has to support a geocentric universe. They don't know this, a lot of them, but it's true. Because that's what relativity is. Relativity is having a reciprocal model that's, relative motion compared to the model that you want. Okay, so that's why we use general relativity, not because it's correct. Okay, but just to show them by their own science that they have to allow a geocentric universe. Okay, and then we'll show them how you build a geocentric universe, and it ain't by the tensor math of general relativity. That's for sure. Okay, so, all right. Do you think the philosopher Pascal was an Orthodox Catholic or heretic? I don't know. I don't know that much about his life. I only know bits and pieces of it. And I know he was a good philosopher. And as a matter of fact, he was against the idea of the expansive universe. He was the one who was fighting for a much more geocentric understanding, because he was of the belief that the whole philosophy of man changed because he became Copernican, you see, and not for the good, for the bad. That the inevitability of the philosophy that came from Copernicus was not good. It took away all that we held as sacred. And God was close to us then. Now God's far away, you see. So he understood all that. But as far as his personal life, I have no idea. Question, in Geocentrism 101, page 85, if the stars are centered on the sun instead of the earth, that would create exactly the same stellar parallax. Are you saying the stars do revolve? Is that the last part? Around the sun and not the earth? No. As a matter of fact, somebody asked me this today. If the sun, then why is the earth the center of the universe? Okay. So the sun is the geometric center of the universe. And that means the stars are centered around the sun. Now just consider that as a big ball, okay? Sun and stars together. That big ball is going around the earth, okay? So the stars are not revolving around the sun. They're in stationary position with the sun, in a stationary position, all going around the Earth. Now, why do they go around the Earth? Well, the whole universe is going around the Earth, stars and sun, comets, whatever, because the Earth is a center of mass. Okay? So if you have a sphere, that sphere is going to go around its center of mass. That's by definition, physics definition. The question is then, where's the center of mass? That's where the Earth occupies that position, center of mass. Okay? And that's why the sun is the geometric center. So this, again, stars are not revolving around the sun. They're all in the same position. Okay? They're all going to go around the Earth. The only difference we have with the sun in the geocentric model is that the sun has its own motion, very slight, but it has its own motion in the opposite direction. Okay, so in other words, the sun, the moon, the comets, the planets, the quasars, the galaxies are all going around clockwise because the universe is carrying. They're all going around clockwise around the Earth every day. Okay? But the sun has a retrograde motion against the stars in the universe of about 1 degree per day by its own momentum. Okay? That's the way it was built. And that's going to take him through the 12 constellations of the zodiac as the sun goes backwards. So the whole thing is moving this way, and the sun is moving a little bit that way. And as it does, it's going to go through some of these stars out here, you see, every day. And this happens to go through 12 constellations. And it takes 365.25 days to complete that retrograde motion. Okay? Now, the moon also has a retrograde motion, counterclockwise with the sun. But it moves 13 degrees per day. And it completes that journey around the Earth in about 27 and a half days. Okay? So, that answers the question. All right. Let's see what else we have here. All right. Dear Robert, since the divine and miraculous as creation ex nihilo and hypostatic union are illogical, why do many box God by logic rules he himself created ex nihilo for material realm in the first place? Well, they would just say that they're not from God. They're from my own mind. You know, you're not going to get a secular logician to admit that the logic he displays is going to come from God. You won't do that. Okay? He thinks the logic is from him. And so, you see what I'm saying? Yeah, it's going to go nowhere. All right. What is the latest information regarding geocentrism? It gets better every day, especially since the Big Bang's fallen apart. I mean, I am just amazed to see every day they're coming up with new assaults on the Big Bang. Of course, you're going to get those who, will defend it no matter what. They would defend the Titanic and say that it's going to come up from the sea grave and be a ship again, But see, there's certain things that they're finding harder and harder to answer. And the premier one today is the James Webb Telescope. That it works in the infrared, so it's much more capable than the Hubble telescope that worked in visible light. And here's the big problem. The further it looks into the universe, and we're talking great distances, according to the way they measure distances by redshift. A month or so ago, they saw a galaxy at redshift 14. That's just unheard of. Redshifts usually come in like 2, 3, you might get 4. So to get a redshift at 14, according to their own measurement scale, this thing is so far out there that it's like, where did that come from? So, and here's the other thing. It's a fully formed galaxy. Now, their previous belief was that if you find a galaxy way out there, it has to be an immature galaxy, because if it's way out there, that means it started, at the Big Bang or right around the Big Bang, and was an early galaxy, and galaxies weren't forming then. You see. So when it finally gets out here, and we know that if it's out here, it was over here first, it should not be a fully formed galaxy. It should be anything but a fully formed galaxy. But guess what? All they're finding is fully formed galaxies. I think I have a picture of it. Here you go. This is a picture that they released. That's a picture from the James Webb Telescope. And look at all those fully formed galaxies out there. See that? That should never be, if you believe in the Big Bang. So that's a problem. Okay? So you get stuff like that, pinpricking them all the time. This thing is destined for collapse. I don't know how long it's going to take, maybe in the next 20, 30 years, my estimate, but it's going to collapse. Okay? And there's more and more people, I find, in the literature, questioning Einstein's theory. You get these real hard knockers that just, whatever Einstein says is true. And then you get some of these young bucks that are coming up and they're saying, look, this just doesn't work. We can't amalgamate Einstein's relativity with quantum mechanics, and we know quantum mechanics works. And okay, so that's a big bugaboo. And then they're having trouble with the space-time concept of special relativity. I just read an article this week that says we need to get rid of space-time. That's the title of the article. You would not say that about Einstein 20 years ago. But today, now these kids are growing up, and who knows who Einstein is? They hear his name, they see his picture, that's about it. But they all hold no allegiance to Einstein. And that the days are coming, you see, when they find out what a farce this thing has been. And I already told you what the farce was. Special relativity was invented as an answer to the Michelson-Morley experiment that showed the Earth wasn't moving in space. If you don't want to believe the Earth is standing still in space, what are you going to do? You're going to twist physics around until you get it to move. And that's what special relativity does. Okay, so that's where it all came from. And so it's built on a bed of sand, and it's all going to come to roost one day. I may be dead and gone by the time it does come, but I predict it is going to fall because it's built on sand. Anyway, let's keep moving. The firmament is a solid dome. Is this a question? Okay. No, the firmament is not a solid dome. The firmament was a spherical structure that God built to keep the water from the earth. And then the firmament was stretched out into the remote recesses of space, and then it became ethereal. And that's why the stars and the planets and the sun can be put into the firmament, as Genesis 1:14 says, because it's now ethereal, not solid. It was solid at one time, a spherical solid structure, and now it's not. Okay? All right. I know you brought up Francis Schaeffer one time. What did you talk about and why did you contact him? What is your full opinion about him? Francis Schaeffer, always intrigued. He died in 1984, a long time ago. I knew him by, he used to have a program, half-hour program, based on his books. The God Who Is There was probably his most famous book, where he's trying to teach the upper class intellectuals how they can believe in God, because he was an upper class intellectual philosopher himself. So he knew how they thought. And he wrote this book to let them know that if you go through philosophy, here's how it leads to God. Okay? He was good at it. Very good at it. And at that time, I was a Protestant. Okay? So that's why I was listening. He was a Protestant. He started this school in Europe. He was Swiss. And I forget what the name of the school was. But he had a lot of famous people come to that school and learn from him. And he was good at putting philosophy on layman's level. And he's a very good communicator. So, and then another book he wrote, it was titled He's There and He's Not Silent, talking about God. And there was a third book in the trilogy. I forget what the name of that was. But he used to have a half-hour program on a Christian radio station I used to work for. And he started talking about his meeting with Catholics in England in 1 year. And he had a great time with them, even though they were giving honor to Mary at that particular event. And I was thoroughly anti-Catholic at the time. So I wrote him a letter and I said, if you don't stop this talk about Mary, I'm going to see that your program's taken off the air here, this Christian. And it was a very big Christian radio station. And I knew the president, and he would listen to what I said if I thought it was bad, and I could get Francis Schaeffer off the air. So I wrote him a letter and warned him of that, and he wrote back to me. And I had the letter somewhere. I have to go look for it. But he tried to explain why he was communicating with, worshiping with Catholics. And I accepted his answer, and I didn't want to take it any further. And everything was hunky-dory in that sense. And then I got fired myself from the Christian radio station for something other than, well, I know what it was. It was the marriage and divorce laws in Matthew 19, Matthew 5, Luke 18, and Mark 10. The teaching, the issue was the exception clause, the except for fornication clause that Jesus uses in Matthew 5:32 and 19:9. And I had a particular interpretation of that, and the president had another interpretation. And I was contesting his interpretation, saying, we're not teaching right. And little did I know that both of us were teaching it wrong when I became a Catholic. But that's what the issue was, and I got fired over that. So anyway, that's the story. All right, so the firmament simply means the first heaven where are firm physical things. No, that's not what it means. The firmament is now the second heaven. That's where the stars are. That's what Genesis 1:14 says. It can't be the first heaven because where the birds fly. Okay, it's going to have to be the second heaven. The third heaven is, of course, heaven, where God is, the angels are. And it's, obviously not a solid dome because it's ethereal. Okay? It's not solid in the sense that, you can put your hand through it. And that's where the stars are. Okay? So, again, it used to be solid. And that's how it can hold up the water on the second day. Okay? And then once the firmament was stretched, as the rest of Scripture tells us, it's going to carry everything with it. Okay? And it's going to make the second heaven. And that's where God put the stars on the fourth day. All right. So, hi, Dr. Segenis. I just watched your debate with Jackson Rowe from last year. I had a thought that if we do the Michelson-Morley on the moon, could that definitely prove geocentrism? Well, if you could get everything just right, okay? Now consider this. When Michelson-Morley did their experiment, they said that their instrument was so sensitive that it could pick up the vibrations of someone walking on the sidewalk 100 yards away. Okay? So that's pretty sensitive. Now, granted, the Michelson-Morley interferometer was 100 times more sensitive than it really had to be to determine the difference in light waves. Okay. So that may take away some of the sting, but this thing has to be sensitive. And in order to take away any vibrations that would come from somebody walking 100 yards away, they had to put it in a mercury bath. And that was pretty dangerous. You know how lethal mercury is? Whew. This is a strange substance. And the thing about it is, I forget what gold is. Gold is has 76 protons, 76 electrons, and you add one more. You add 77 protons and 77 electrons instead of 76 that gold has, and you got mercury. So just one more proton, one more electron, you got mercury. And it's the strangest substance that of all the elements on the periodic table. And it's lethal. Just a few fumes of that could kill you. Okay, so I mean, and they made a mercury bath to put the interferometer in, the thing that was going to measure the light waves, so they wouldn't feel any vibration, because mercury has this uncanny ability to take in vibration and absorb it so that there's no effect. So, you'd have to have something like that on the moon. And how are you going to get it there? I mean, we question whether a man could even get to the moon, right? Don't we do that today? All right. So how are you going to get all the equipment there? And then how are you going to build it in the no atmosphere of the moon and survive for days on end, weeks on end? And then you have to complete all the trials. You just can't do it once and say, well, we accomplished our task. You may have to do this thing 100 times and record the results 100 times, because guess what? They're each going to be different. Yep, that's the nature of experimentation. You never get the exact results you got prior. You get very close, but not exact. So you're going to have a lot of trials to make this thing, workable. Then you're going to have facilities to take care of human needs, right? Food, rest, toilet, bath water, you name it. It's all got to be there. Okay? And you have to have enough money to pay for it all. We're $36 trillion in debt already. Where do you think the money's going to come from? And you think they're going to give it to us to prove that the earth is the center of the universe? That Einstein was wrong? Not on your life. So, I mean, the practical aspect of this just, says no. Okay. Theoretically, yeah. If we could get an working interferometer on the moon, no problem. Yeah, we should be able to fix this issue of the veracity of Einstein's theory in no time. Theoretically speaking. Practically, not in a million years. Okay? And I'm probably right about that. All right. All right, looking for a question. Claire of Assisi. Yeah, that's who it was. Thank you, Hans. Forgot all about that. All right. Question: any update on your carbon dating learning? I didn't know I was learning about it. I would say this, in my recent study of it, that carbon dating is not as accurate as I thought it was before. I've seen studies now where they have examined the same specimen 3 times and got 3 different carbon dates for it that were separated by tens of thousands of years. Okay, so there's something's fishy going on. I don't know exactly what it is, but the whole potassium argon thing, the uranium decay, all that stuff, the parent-daughter relationship is bad enough, but there's something. And then you find out that these secular evolutionists refuse to carbon date dinosaur bones. There's not one that has been carbon dated. And if it has been carbon dated, it's probably been locked away somewhere, so nobody knows about it. So Yeah, I'm just not as mm, not as convinced about the accuracy of carbon dating as I used to be. I've seen too much evidence to the contrary, and it doesn't get any better. So, all right, let's move on. Looks like I'm getting near the end here. Oh, we got 9 minutes left. Yeah, so I guess you're right there. If he does say the sun goes around the earth, maybe that's why he befriended me, huh? Uh, all right. Okay. I'm looking for a question. All right, question. In one of your lectures, you say that the earth doesn't move and that maybe the special theory of relativity is wrong, which raises for me questions. For example, muons confirm time dilation. No, they don't. Okay. Now, I'm going to, Arch Maria, I don't know whether you're man or woman, but no, muons don't. Okay. So this is one of the fallacies that they presume that, it's going to shut everybody up because they tell us the life of muons, and so they can't hit the earth at the same time, that they have a half life and all this stuff. Well, I want you to do this. Get Galileo was wrong. Okay, do yourself a favor. Get the Galileo was wrong books. They're on the website robertsongenis.org, and I'll even give you a discount, 15% discount. Just contact me and I'll give you the discount. And go read a section on the muons. Okay. And, or you could get the PDF, and it's in volume 2. Galileo was wrong. Look up muons in the search engine and see what the reality is. And it's not what they say it is. Okay. And I think even Robert Bennett, my co-author, covers that issue in his section, chapter 10. So before you make any conclusions, go look at the chapter on muons. Okay? I'm not going to explain it here as it's a little complicated for people. It might go over their head. But if you know anything about muons, you'll understand it. All right. Question. Are there any geocentrism studies in the side of EO/OO apostolic churches that are in line with Hildegard? I couldn't tell you. I don't know. Is EO Eastern Orthodox? I'm not sure. In the side of EOOO, I don't know what that is. But there are Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholics who are much more open to geocentrism than Latin Catholics. I know that. That's all I can tell you, though. Question. Why did Jesus chide Nicodemus for not understanding that being born of the water was necessary for salvation when no such requirement existed in Judaism? Well, yeah, that's a good question, because it seems like Jesus is requiring a lot from Nicodemus. But what Jesus is most likely referring to is passages like Ezekiel 36:26, or is talking about God sprinkling the water upon the Israelites and cleansing them. Okay. And if you were a good prophet, you would know that Ezekiel 36 is talking about baptism prophesied in the New Testament, because that's what Ezekiel 36 is talking about. Now, the Jews of that day may not have known about it, okay? But when you start talking about sprinkling of water to cleanse, and you know that's a prophecy, well, Jesus is just demanding something that Nicodemus should have thought of logically, that if it's prophecy about my coming, and I'm telling you that unless you receive the water, you cannot be saved, put two and two together, okay? And you're a teacher of Israel, he says to Nicodemus, and you don't know these things? Well, in other words, he's saying that you should be up on these things. You should be up on the fact that Ezekiel 36:26 is a prophecy about my coming. And here I am talking to you. So it's like, you know, I can put the breadcrumbs out for you, but I can't eat them for you. Okay? Then you got passages like that may have led to passages like Ezekiel 36, which is 1 Corinthians 10:4, where there Paul talks about the Israelites being baptized in the sea. He actually uses the word baptized. Okay? They were all baptized in the sea. And that's when they came out of Egypt and crossed the sea and went into the desert. Okay? So, you know, that's a pretty good analogy, because baptism is like 1 Peter 3:18 says, is supposed to wash the filth from you, not the filth of the body, but the filth of sin. And in the paradigm with the Egyptians were like the sinful people that were on the body of the Israelites, and the Red Sea washed them off. That's why it's like a baptism, you see. So if you're a teacher of Israel, Pharisee, who knows Scripture backwards and forwards, you should know these things. You should at least have them as a question in your mind. Like, what can that mean? You know? If Paul he's a Pharisee, right? He was a Pharisee, and he's getting this from the Exodus, where the sea washes off the Egyptians as a baptism for Israel. Why can't Nicodemus get it? You know, Paul must have known the connection between the two. So, you know, you got stuff like that leans us to this. Nicodemus should have known more than he purports to know. Instead of playing dumb, like, oh, does that mean I have to go into my mother's womb again? Oh, come on. I bet you Jesus felt like wringing his neck. Yeah, why don't you go try to do that, Nicodemus, and tell me how far you get, okay? And then come back and talk to me again. Boy, how I would like to embellish some of those conversations in the New Testament. Anyway, that's where Nicodemus probably should have gotten it. Okay, if Paul can get it, Nicodemus can get it. They're both Pharisees. All right. I'm sorry, but it is now 12 o'clock. Save your questions, bring them back next week. I'll be glad to answer them. Right now, I'm losing my voice, so it's been good. I'm glad our chat room was working today. That is for sure. I was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to see anything, but it looks like I've conquered the problem. All right. So I hope the theology of the body thing was good for you today, and everything else brought you closer to the Lord. And I sincerely mean that. That is my purpose here, to use my gift to help you develop your gift and your relationship with God. So please love God even more today than you did yesterday. That's all I ask for. Until next time, we will see you. God bless you. Please pray for me, and I will pray for you.